In almost every racing game, you are bound to find some form of acceleration stat, and this stat is especially important in games like the Mario Kart series. Unique to Mario Kart Wii is a very wide range of acceleration across all of the vehicles, and what goes on underneath the seemingly straightforward mechanic is a surprisingly complex system. I've seen people get many things wrong about acceleration before, so this is an in-depth analysis on acceleration in Mario Kart Wii. Before we talk about acceleration, we first need to talk about speed. Speed, as defined by mathematical terms, is the change in distance over a unit of time. In Mario Kart Wii, we can use the in-game data address for vehicle speed to find out how many units of distance on the coordinate plane that the vehicle attempts to move in one frame, and use a code to put that speedometer in place of the milliseconds on the timer. This value is commonly given the unit of kilometers per hour, and even though this is not accurate since it is actually just units per frame, I'll be referring to it in km from now on. Now on to acceleration. The formula for acceleration is very similar, being the change in speed over a unit of time. To find acceleration in Mario Kart Wii, we can record the vehicle speed on 2 consecutive frames, and then subtract to get the acceleration rate in the form of units per frame squared or kmh per frame. So now that we know what acceleration is, we can see how it works in the game. In Mario Kart Wii, there are 2 main types of acceleration. Those are the normal acceleration from your vehicle and the acceleration from a boost. Boost acceleration is constant across all characters, vehicles, and engine classes, but different boosts accelerate you at different rates. Most boosts, such as the mini turbo, start boost, respawn boost, and standstill mini turbos, as well as items such as mega mushrooms, stars, and the TC boost, all accelerate you at 3 kmh per frame, while mushroom and boost panel boosts accelerate you at 7 kmh per frame. All trick boosts accelerate at 6 kmh per frame, and when you just drive on the surface of a zipper, it will accelerate you at 5 kmh per frame. Drafts also count as a boost and have a constant acceleration of 0.7 kmh per frame. Vehicle acceleration, as you might have guessed, is different on every vehicle and character. This is where the actual acceleration stats come in. You may have heard of vehicle and character stats being expressed as whole numbers on a scale of 0 through 80 from people like Troy.
The jet setter has the highest speed with a value of 69.
Arkintel.
An acceleration stat of approximately 31.
And websites such as sportdoggy.com. These are very close to what the stats are like, but they just aren't actually true. Whenever a stat is represented like that, it is referring to the length of the stat bar you see on the vehicle selection screen, which is not very consistent with the real stats of vehicles and characters. For example, take the drift of Dolphin Dasher and the Spear. According to a stat chart like this, Dolphin Dasher, with 24 points, has less drift than the Spear with 29 points. But if anyone has ever used the Dolphin Dasher and the Spear, you know very well that the Dolphin Dasher can drift almost as well as the Flame Runner. Even when compensating for speed with a code that changes vehicle speed, you can clearly see that these kinds of stats are not true. For the true stats used in the game, I recommend viewing the Toktum wiki page on in-game vehicle stats taken from driverparam.bin and kartparam.bin. Now, I was going to take a moment to point out all of the inaccuracies on the wiki page relating to acceleration, but it actually updated with correct information as I was working on the project, so hooray for that. When looking at how acceleration really works, you can see a whole bunch of numbers listed on this page. All of the A values here represent the acceleration rate in kmh per frame for each stage, and all of the T values represent the percentage of speed that those stages change at. Each stage begins at a particular percentage of your maximum speed, and the rate of acceleration during the stages changes to form a linear slope that climbs and falls to connect each stage. The exact acceleration rate on any given frame is determined by what your speed is on that frame and where between the stages that speed falls. The actual acceleration rates are very important, but what many people don't realize is how the spacing of stages help acceleration. Since the acceleration rate usually decreases as you increase in speed, stages that occur at higher percentages will accelerate faster at higher speeds than lower percentages, which is why the spear can accelerate between base speed and top wheelie speed faster than the Flame Runner, despite having lower A2 and A3 values. Now on to drift acceleration. During the older version of the wiki that I consulted, it listed 4 unique drift acceleration stages, but I quickly found that only the last 2 of them are actually used in the game, and this has been corrected in the newer version of the page. The same logic as regular acceleration applies with drift acceleration here. Acceleration stages tell you the rate in km per frame, and the t value determines the percentage of speed that they change. One thing to remember about drift acceleration is that it actually correlates very closely with drift tightness instead of the other acceleration, meaning that Bullet Bike has the fastest drift acceleration and Phantom has the slowest. What's left is character acceleration, which works slightly differently. As it turns out, character acceleration only affects the first 2 stages. On the wiki page, you can see that the A0 and A1 stats are listed for drift and non-drift acceleration, and you can just add those values onto the vehicle acceleration stages. This means that character acceleration is effective when traveling at low speeds, but actually diminishes a lot as you accelerate at faster speeds. That's the basis of acceleration without any external effects, but here's yet another thing to think about. Whenever your maximum speed is modified by something in the game, the percentages and acceleration rate in each stage remains constant. So for instance, Funky Kong on the Flame Runner's stages change at about 17 km/h, 67 km/h, and 78 km/h, but when you wheelie and have your top speed increased by 15%, the acceleration rates remain the same, but the percentages now correspond to 19 km/h, 77 km/h, and 89 km/h. That might not sound like a big deal, but remember what I said about the spacing of stages? This means that you will accelerate faster at the same speeds in a wheelie whenever your acceleration rate is on a decreasing slope, since the higher acceleration stages will be sustained longer. On the other hand, you will accelerate slower when the acceleration rate is increasing because the slower acceleration rates will be sustained for longer. This slower side of wheelie acceleration is especially relevant for Flame Runner, Mach Bike, and Bullet Bike because all 3 of these vehicles have increasing acceleration during the A1 to A2 interval, so it is actually faster to not wheelie during the majority of acceleration. Similarly, Quacker, Sneakster, and Spear have increasing acceleration during the first stage, so it is slower to wheelie within that time as well. The other principle applies for when your maximum speed is lowered by things like off-road or the shock. Your acceleration rate will be faster than normal when it is increasing and slower than normal when it is decreasing. So this means that it would actually be faster to briefly touch off-road in vehicles with increasing acceleration stages. So up until now, this information has mostly been experimental data without much practical purpose. But using what we know, we can now find out and compare the fastest ways to accelerate. Everyone knows there's always been the age-old question of what vehicles and characters actually need to SSMT from a stop, and this question has never actually been fully explored and answered correctly before. To recap, the acceleration rates and stages vary across vehicles, but the SSMT is a boost acceleration, so it is always constant. The SSMT requires you to hold A and B when you are between 10 and negative 10 km/h for at least 76 frames to get a 30 frame speed boost that accelerates you at 3 km/h per frame. If you were to just find the average acceleration rate in that time frame, you would get about 0.849 km/h per frame, which is actually greater than all vehicles. The reason that we don't always SSMT is because you don't want to find speed, you want to find distance. You have to take into account the distance covered by normal acceleration in the same amount of time to determine which method is faster, since the SSMT will always reach top speed sooner. If you want to mathematically find that, you would need to add up the distance on every single frame of both sequences until normal acceleration reaches maximum speed and see which method covered the most distance in that time. You could, in theory, come up with a very complex formula for that when given the necessary information from the wiki, but instead I went and compared them directly by writing down the change in coordinates before and after acceleration. If you have seen Arkentel's video on the SSMT, you know that he made up this 31 rule, which has no real basis in anything since it relies on the stat bars, but it actually holds up fairly well until you get to the borderline vehicles. Some things to know are that all bullet bikes, except with Toad, benefit from the SSMT, and the same with all Sneaksters except with Peach. In the description, you can find a link to this spreadsheet that includes the differences on every combo. And that about sums up how acceleration works. I want to give enormous thanks to DM248 for helping spend a ton of time with all of the acceleration and speed tests, most of which are now obsoleted by the updated wiki page, as well as theorizing and coming up with ideas with the data, and just helping me through this project in general. I want to give another special thanks to Wade474 for helping make modified vehicle stats so I could confirm my findings. You can find links to all of my data and resources in the description.